The Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the TPP, is a free trade agreement currently being negotiated among the United States and 11 other participating countries. Meant to serve as a model for free trade agreements in the future, the outcome of the TPP will not only influence 40% of the United States GDP, but also the world economy for decades to come. However, it seems that within the TPP exists an improper dependence on corporate interests, shifting the TPP from serving the public to benefiting corporations. Let's consider Professor Lawrence Lessig's working definition of institutional corruption. Corporations exert a systematic and strategic influence on the outcome of the TPP. This influence is regular and predictable. At the start of TPP negotiations, corporations like the Ford Motor Company, Boeing, and tobacco giant Philip Morris International have written letters to the United States Trade Representative expressing their objectives for the trade agreement negotiations. But note that the U.S. government asked for these public comments via website regulations.gov, so technically anyone could have exerted influence in this case. But many of these companies continued to influence trade representatives through informal means as negotiations were taking place. Many have sponsored receptions and awards events where a certain price buys corporations direct access to TPP representatives over dinner and allows them to exert strategic influence to sway negotiations in favor of corporate interests, like compensation when expropriation occurs or the complete elimination of all tariffs on all goods. Perhaps there is nothing wrong with companies pushing for a trade agreement that would benefit their corporate interests, yet sometimes these interests can undermine the effectiveness of the TPP by weakening its ability to achieve its purpose. One mission of the TPP is to support each party's right to protect public health, including facilitating timely access to affordable medicines. Yet pharmaceutical companies are pushing to increase intellectual property rules via the TPP, and a recently leaked chapter of the agreement reveals provisions to lengthen patent terms beyond their normal 20 years, and to expand criteria for granting drug patents, or else face international courts for violating the trade agreement. These provisions decrease market competition, and corporations will surely take advantage to spike up drug prices. Don't believe it? Consider a case in 2012, when India manufactured a generic cancer drug for $157. The same dose from pharma giant Bayer, $5,000. Lengthening patent terms will prevent generic brands from issuing low-cost drugs and will weaken the public's access to affordable medicine, a mission of the TPP. This is an example from just one chapter of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a chapter made available to the public through WikiLeaks and not official means. This lack of transparency from trade representatives weakens public trust in the TPP. The Sunlight Foundation and more than 30 other organizations from around the world have expressed concern, stating that negotiations of the TPP are done behind closed doors, with drafts of the agreement available only to industry representatives. These organizations have urged the leaders of the TPP to conduct any further trade negotiations in a manner consistent with the democratic principles of openness and accountability. Over 150 House Democrats have also signed a letter stating that they are troubled by the continued lack of adequate congressional consultation in many areas of the proposed pact. At times, trade representatives may need information from industry leaders to make informed decisions during trade negotiations, decisions that really are in the public's interest, and in order not to give away one's bargaining position to other countries, these negotiations are kept private. However, allowing companies to receive copies of agreement drafts and to sponsor TPP-related events crosses the line from receiving helpful industry information to allowing corporations to guide the agreement. A solution to this problem is threefold: to keep the system of publicly accessible comments. This ensures that industry leaders are able to express their objectives for the agreement, trade representatives are able to take these objectives into consideration, and these objectives are transparent to the public. To keep agreement drafts confidential among trade representatives only and limit communication with industry to asking for specific factual information and not draft feedback. This would keep the largest and most powerful corporations from having disproportionate influence on the agreement. And to create a 5-year trial period for the TPP, after which involved countries must reconvene and adjust the agreement or extend its terms for the next decade. This ensures that if the outcomes of a signed agreement happen to not be in the public's interest, say they cause damage to public health for instance, then trade representatives are able to adjust the TPP language without violating the agreement. The weaknesses of this solution are that since large corporations control a larger percentage of the economy, perhaps their feedback on proposed drafts may be beneficial to trade negotiations. And even if it's not, prohibiting the solicitation of feedback may not completely prevent industry leaders from informally and privately communicating with trade representatives. Also, the ability of trade representatives to alter the agreement after 5 years may be limited, especially if delegates from other countries do not agree with the proposed changes. In light of potential drawbacks, however, this threefold solution will bring the Trans-Pacific Partnership back from serving corporate interests to serving the public.